Petra is a music group regarded as a pioneer of the Christian rock and contemporary Christian music genres. Formed in 1972, the band took its name from the Greek word for rock. Though they disbanded formally in 2006, incarnations of Petra have played reunion shows in the years since and released an album in November 2010. In 2013, the band returned from retirement with a new drummer Cristian Borneo and recorded a new song titled Holy Is Your Name, as well as going back on tour. With a style initially similar to the Eagles and Lynyrd Skynyrd, Petra's sound evolved into a more energetic, driving rock sound in the early 1980s akin to Foreigner, Styx and Journey. Throughout the 1980s and into the early 1990s, Petra was one of the world's most popular Christian rock bands, with each of its albums during that period selling hundreds of thousands of copies while the band sold out arenas and regularly placed songs at the top of Christian radio charts. With its lyrics, music and style, Petra influenced numerous other artists at a time when Christian rock experienced strong opposition from many conservative pastors and churches. In more than 3 decades, the band experienced numerous lineup changes yet released 20 studio albums, as well as 3 Spanish-language and 2 live albums, selling nearly 10 million copies while being nominated for 13 Grammy Awards, winning 4, and winning 10 Dove Awards. Its biggest hit, The Coloring Song, reached a top position on 3 Christian radio charts simultaneously, and at its peak, the band's tours rivaled Amy Grant's in popularity among Christian audiences. Petra was the first rock band inducted into the Gospel Music Hall of Fame and the first Christian band whose memorabilia was included in the Hard Rock Cafe restaurant chain. The band announced its retirement in 2005, launching a farewell tour that was recorded for release on CD and DVD. Petra's 33-year career ended with a performance in the early hours of January 1, 2006, in Murphy, North Carolina. Band members subsequently reunited for concerts in 2007 and 2010. In November 2010, an incarnation of the band's mid-1980s lineup surfaced under the name Classic Petra. They released a CD titled Back to the Rock featuring 2 new songs as well as re-recordings of hits from that era. The band released a companion live CD and DVD in 2011. Musical style: Petra's style changed significantly over the decades in an effort to remain relevant to the youth it was trying to reach but remained within the rock genre implied by its name. At its inception, the band's style was eclectic, borrowing from musical influences as diverse as the Eagles, Lynyrd Skynyrd and Kansas. Early albums featured electric double guitar leads reminiscent of the Allman Brothers Band. In the 1980s, the band began using keyboards and synthesizers to complement its guitar-based rock. Early in the decade, Petra produced a straightforward pop-rock sound reminiscent of Foreigner, while increasingly using synthesizers and techno-style effects as the decade progressed. By the late 1980s, Petra used a change in vocalists to embrace a guitar-based hard rock style similar to Def Leppard, Aerosmith and Journey, a style that, along with the growing popularity of Christian rock as a whole, led to Petra's greatest success. With the rise of alternative rock in the mid-1990s, the band's albums subsequently featured an increasing reliance on acoustic guitars and mellower tunes, including a fully acoustic album. Petra returned to its roots with a hard rock album in 2003, while the 2010 Classic Petra reunion was billed as an effort to re-record some of the band's early 1980s hits with a modern edge. It included 2 new songs that fit within the guitar and keyboard-based rock style that marked much of the band's early career. History = 1972 1979, the birth of Petra = in the early 1970s. Songwriter and guitarist Bob Hartman met bassist John DeGroff and formed the band Dove, which quickly disbanded when DeGroff left to attend a Bible school in Fort Wayne, Indiana, known as the Christian Training Center. Hartman soon followed, and in 1972 he and DeGroff joined 2 classmates, guitarist Greg Huff and drummer Bill Glover, to form Petra. The band played small Midwest venues such as churches, coffeehouses and parks, to share the message of Christianity with concertgoers. A frequent venue was a Fort Wayne Christian-themed coffeehouse named the Adam's Apple. This mix of evangelism with rock placed Petra among the early pioneers of Jesus music, part of the larger counterculture Jesus movement of the late 1960s and early 1970s. Church authorities struggled with and frequently opposed the use of churches for rock concerts, and few Christian radio stations, with the exception of some college-based signals, would play the band's songs. Petra was criticized for its rock sound, a hint of the opposition it would experience as its popularity grew. Petra's unique blend of style and message attracted the attention of the newly created Myrrh Records' Paul Craig Pano, who convinced the label's founder, Billy Ray Hearn, to attend one of the band's concerts at the Adam's Apple. Hearn signed Petra in 1973 to record its debut album, which Hearn produced. Hearn later said he knew Petra was the most radical thing around. As far out as anything that had come out until that time. With no lead vocalist, Hartman and Huff shared singing duties on the self-titled debut, which was released in 1974. Featuring tight, Allman Brothers-type dual guitar lines and riffs, Petra also featured the comical country tune Lucas McGraw, which became something of a cult classic, and the seminal Backslide in Blues, the first contemporary Christian blues song put on vinyl. The rarity of being a Christian rock band led to larger concerts and greater popularity, and Myrrh asked Petra to record a second album aimed principally at non-Christians, reflecting the evangelistic nature of the band's shows. Come and Join Us, by Hartman's admission, his vocal style did not match well with the band's genre, and Petra brought in a number of guest vocalists for the second record, among them former E-vocalist Greg X. Voltz. Voltz took the lead vocals on 2 songs and backed up several others. Among Voltz's songs was a cover of the Argent anthem God Gave Rock and Roll to You, which Myrrh had hoped to release as a radio single to the secular market. The song was immediately controversial and revolutionary. It was the boldest statement anyone in Christian music had made until that time, said Ambassador Artist Agency President Wes Yoder. This was a radical notion, especially in the minds of the leaders of conservative churches. Other guest singers featured in the album were Steve Camp, Karen Morrison, and Austin Roberts. The recording process also was marked by disputes. The label refused Hartman's request to name the album God Gave Rock and Roll to You, while a bluesy, crowd-favorite track written by Hartman about rejecting the pre-Christian self, Killing My Old Man, was deemed too controversial and cut from the album. With a harder-edged sound reminiscent of Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple, Come and Join Us was released in 1977. It failed to sell well, however, and Myrrh dropped Petra from its label. Wash is Whiter Than. The next year, the band experienced the first of its numerous lineup changes, as Huff left to form his own band, and DeGroff followed suit, leaving Hartman, Glover and newly hired guitarist-vocalist Rob Frazier. The trio began work on the band's third album despite the lack of a record deal. Glover left the band shortly after, and Hartman turned to Voltz for drumming and vocal help. Already entertaining an offer from REO Speedwagon to be the band's lead singer, Voltz accepted Hartman's offer instead. With the band intact, touring continuing and writing begun for a new record, Petra found itself at a crossroads. Its Christian lyrics limited the number of non-Christians attending its concerts, while its hard edge likewise limited its Christian audience. Petra's performances soon attracted the notice of another newly formed label, Star Song Records, which inked the band for its third album. Recording began after a 9-month sabbatical during which its members considered what direction Petra should take. Upon returning, Hartman, Frazier and Voltz worked with a host of studio musicians to record Wash is Whiter Than, a ballad-heavy soft rock album that drew criticism from fans of the band's previous hard-edged style when it was released in 1979. Lyrically, the band shifted from overt evangelism to encouraging the young Christians who made up the bulk of its audience. The album resulted in the band's first radio hit, Why Should the Father Bother? Along with garnering Petra radio success for the first time, Wash is Whiter Than's musical depth established the band's artistic credibility, proving Petra could play multiple styles of music and appeal to more than just the radicals in Christendom. 1980 Euro 1985, the Greg X. Voltz era. Though the band had scored a hit a Euro, Why Should the Father Bother was the 16th biggest Christian radio single of 1979. Wash Is Whiter Than was not a big seller, thanks largely to distribution problems that left many copies of the record out of stores until demand for the product had subsided. Still in search of a breakthrough record and restricted by finances from touring nationally, Frazier left the band, leaving just Hartman and Volz, whom Hartman had hired as the full-time lead vocalist. With no record sales, no way to promote the albums nationally and barely any band, Hartman considered breaking up Petra. Instead Hartman met Mark Kelly, a former lead vocalist and bassist for the band One Accord, and keyboardist John Slick at a Bible study and, after setting up a jam session, hired them to join him and Volz. Yet the two most important additions Petra made in 1980 did not play an instrument or sing a note for the band. With Petra having established its radio bona fides and refocused its lyrical message, Star Song looked for a producer who could take the band's fourth album back to its hard rock roots, hiring Jonathan David Brown, who had successfully produced albums with radio hits by fellow Jesus Music bands Daniel Amos, Sweet Comfort Band and Parable. Additionally, Petra hired Mark Hollingsworth, who had experience in the secular music industry, to manage and promote the band. Never Say Die, the four band members and studio drummer Keith Edwards recorded Never Say Die and released it in 1981, with the first single a song originally written and performed by Volz's old band. The coloring song was Petra's big break, rocketing to the top of 3 Christian radio charts and reaching the top 5 of a fourth. Other songs including The Haunting for Annie, The Rocking Chameleon, and the controversial Killing My Old Man became audience favorites. Sporting a heavier, more polished sound in the vein of Foreigner, Styx or Kansas, Never Say Die became the breakthrough album for which the band and its label had hoped, receiving rave reviews. CCM magazine compared the band's new sound to Boston's, praising the album's lyrical and musical content and calling Never Say Die by far their finest to date. Ultimately, the coloring song became the third hottest song on Christian radio in 1982 and the 14th highest-ranked single of the decade on the Christian Adult Contemporary charts. It stayed on the radio charts an astounding 14 months, while For Annie reached a top 5 on Christian radio in 24 markets. As important as the success on radio was the band's ability to tour nationally, the costs of which had been formidable in previous years. Unable to raise enough money for nationwide tours in support of its previous albums, Petra received another break when the band's servant invited it to open on its 1981 82 tour. Under Hollingsworth's tutelage, the band refined its live performances, its members dressing in camouflage to emphasize the spiritual warfare theme recalled by Never Say Die's artwork, which featured an ocean war setting with an electric guitar doubling as an aircraft carrier. The tour turned Never Say Die into a commercial hit. In December 1981, it became the first Petra album to crack the Billboard Top 40 Inspirational LPs chart, debuting at number 27, peaking at number 7 in April 1982, and lasting on the chart through February 1983, more than 60 weeks after its debut. More Power to Ya. Shortly after recording Never Say Die, Petra hired Louis Weaver, a former drummer with early Christian rock acts Randy Matthews and Fireworks. The band's touring lineup was set, and Petra went on the road for 300 days in 1982, playing 162 shows, stopping only for the 5 weeks it took to record the follow-up album, More Power to Ya, that summer. The album built on the themes introduced by its predecessor, from the artwork again featuring electric guitars, this time doubling as Star Wars-style spaceships to the music, which again featured a mix of hard-driving rockers and radio-friendly ballads. The formula was becoming clear: 2 radio ballads, 1 Volz-penned praise tune, and 6 or 7 straight-ahead progressive rock songs written by Hartman, touching on topics aimed mostly at young Christians. Petra also used the record to diffuse the backmasking controversy, which had begun to spread into Christian music, as conservative church leaders accused Christian artists of hiding subliminal messages that could only be heard when records were played in reverse. Inserting a blatant piece of backmasking in the break between the title track and hard rocker Judas Kiss, the band's message was less than subtle. Played in reverse, The backmasked portion stated, "What are you looking for the devil for when you ought to be looking for the Lord?" It was not the first Euro, nor would it be the last Euro time Petra weighed in against critics of contemporary Christian music. The title track became a smash radio hit, the fourth hottest song of 1983 on Christian adult contemporary radio, and the album was hailed as Petra's best yet. Ever since Washes White with Anne, the new Petra has been working out the bugs of a polished pop rock sound. With their latest release, More Power to Ya, Say Goodbye to Bugs. Petra has crafted a style that could easily lock horns with anything on the industry charts and win. The band also began receiving attention from the mainstream music industry, as Billboard dubbed More Power to Ya a top album pick, and praised the band's surging music, tough lyrics and effective vocals. Helped by the positive press and Star Song's recent distribution deal with Word Records, the album quickly surpassed the sales of Never Say Die, jumping to 6th on the Billboard Inspirational chart within 3 months and trailing only albums by pop and traditional Christian artists such as Amy Grant, Sandy Patty and the Imperials. A year after its release, More Power to Ya remained one of the 5 best-selling albums in Christian music, while Never Say Die remained in the top 20 Euro more than 2 years after it hit the shelves. At the end of 1982, the two albums had sold nearly 100,000 units combined. By the next summer, More Power to Ya alone had topped 125,000, a total nearly unthinkable for a Christian rock album just 12 months earlier. More Power to Ya would not drop out of the top 40 Christian albums until June 1985, more than 2.5 years after its debut. Not of This World, Petra again hit the road for an intense tour with Servant, playing to an estimated 150,000 people in 1982, mostly in venues seating as few as 1,000 people. Petra played 152 shows in 1983, taking 6 weeks off that summer to record the follow-up, Not of This World. Stylistically, the album was similar to the band's previous 2 releases, filled with straight-ahead rockers and garnished with radio-friendly ballads, but for the first time, the band experimented with synthesizers. However, they did not shift completely away from the Hammond B3 organ, as it was featured in several tracks. Nevertheless, the result was something of a preview of the band's direction in future albums, as Petra would embrace the heavier guitar styles that such a sound better complemented. As if to emphasize the shift, the album opened and closed with Petra's first-ever instrumental tracks, synthesized versions of the Doxology. As with the band's most recent albums, Not of This World was well received critically and commercially. By now widely recognized as the top Christian rock band in the genre's short history, the Petra formula was well in place. Not of This World continues Petra's Euro unregistered trademark's winning streak of great records that minister the good news with good music, CCM magazine wrote in praising the album. In addition, Not of This World garnered Petra its first Grammy nomination, for Best Performance by a Gospel Duo, Group, Choir or Chorus in 1985. Continuing with the trend of producing radio hits, the title track became a major radio hit during 1983 and 1984, with Grave Robber being a minor radio hit during that same time. Lift Him Up was the featured praise song on this album. The album was massively successful in the still new world of Christian rock. It became the #1 Christian album in the country in February 1984, dislodging Amy Grant's Age to Age, which had held the top spot for more than a year. More than 6 months after its release, Not of This World remained in the top 5, behind 2 albums by Grant and 1 by Patty. More Power to Ya, in its 86th week on the chart, was still in the top 10. To support Not of This World, Petra launched its biggest tour yet, a Euro 150 dates around the world with a total attendance of more than 450,000 people through the end of 1984. Headlining for the first time, Petra poured resources into creating a concert experience as dynamic as any secular rock band, using numerous lights, stage effects and costumes. Hollingsworth, the band's manager, made Petra's mission clear. The band is not in competition with other Christian bands. We feel we are competing with Journey, Styx and Speedwagon. We need to be aware of them, because the people who come to see Petra go to see those bands as well. We are being very Norwave we don't need Euro unregistered trademark to keep that in mind. We need to have a light system, sound system and presentation that will be competitive with those groups. With 1984 drawing to a close, Not of This World was deemed Christian music's fourth best-selling album of the year, while More Power to Ya, released nearly 2 years earlier, was number 5. No other rock albums were in the top 12. Petra itself, meanwhile, was listed second only to Amy Grant as Billboard's top inspirational artist of 1984. Beat the System, by any measure, Petra was at the height of its success as it toured for Not of This World and prepared to record a follow-up album. No Christian rock band has sold more records, played before bigger crowds or had enjoyed such pervasive radio airplay. As Petra ended its tour and prepared to enter the studio, Slick left the band, and Petra again turned to Brown to produce what would ultimately be the last studio album of the Volts era. Looking for a more techno-influenced sound and down a keyboardist, Brown turned to a programmer to create keyboard, bass and drum sounds electronically, effectively sidelining Kelly and Weaver during the recording process and continuing a practice begun the previous album in which Brown sought someone other than Weaver to drum for the band inside the studio. Toward the end of recording the album, John Laurie, who had played with the band during the Not of This World tour after fulfilling his obligations to the Joe English Band, joined officially as Petra's newest keyboardist. Beat the System was released in 1985, and it featured a dramatic departure from Petra's previous style, emphasizing keyboards, electronic drums and computerized sound effects. The techno-industrial record was a monster hit. Helped in part by a newly inked distribution agreement between Word and A&M that would give Petra and other Word-distributed bands placement in mainstream music stores for the first time, Beat the System sold more than 200,000 copies in 4 months, and by the end of the year, Billboard had certified Petra as the biggest-selling gospel music group in the country. When it debuted at number 18 on the Billboard Top 40 Inspirational LPs chart in February 1985, Beat the System trailed both Not of This World and More Power to Ya. Not for long, it leapt to number 4 on the next chart, giving Petra 2 top 10 albums for the first time, and by June it had taken over the top spot on the chart, which it held for more than 2 months. In the end, Beat the System was one of the nation's top 2 Christian albums for nearly half a year. For its career, Petra topped the million record mark in 1985, with 900,000 of them sold in the 4 years since Never Say Die. At the time of his release, Beat the System was the biggest Christian rock record ever recorded and the third biggest Christian album of the 1980s, even though it did not produce any radio hits. By decade's end, Beat the System's impact on the Christian sales charts trailed only records by Grant, Patty, Steve Green and Michael W. Smith. Finally, the band was nominated for a Grammy for the second consecutive year, again for Best Gospel Performance by a Duo, Group, Choir or Chorus. Captured in time and space, joining the MTV World, Petra also recorded its first music video, for Beat the System's title track, then went on tour again, playing what was considered the biggest Christian rock tour of its time. Petra ultimately played to more than 500,000 people in the year-long world tour, which ranked second in all of Christian music only to Amy Grant's. To capture the energy of the tour, the band recorded performances in Tennessee and South Carolina over 3 nights in November 1985 and released the final product on vinyl and VHS shortly after, dubbing it Captured in Time and Space. The album was a farewell to Petra's first era of popularity and the sound it had cultivated with Volts' distinctive vocals. As constant touring took its toll on the band, Hartman and Volts began to disagree about Petra's future, both on stage and off. The tour, while it drew more fans than ever, was expensive, and it left Petra hurting financially. Increased competition from other Christian rock bands, for whom Petra had paved the way, led to lower than expected showings as the tour went on. As Hartman told CCM magazine in 1986, "If I had to put it in a nutshell without getting too deep, I would have to say it's business. Greg and I agree on just about everything except business." In 1985 Volts announced he would leave the band to pursue a solo career upon completion of the tour and release of the live album, leaving in doubt the future of the world's biggest Christian rock band. 1986 Euro 1994, Petra's peak. With Petra hurting financially and Volts announcing his departure, rumors swirled that Petra would break up. Instead, Hartman turned to former Head East vocalist John Schlitt, whom he had met on an airplane some years before but who had since converted to Christianity and left rock music altogether. Schlitt needed little convincing. He was introduced to Petra fans at a show in Australia in February 1986. With Petra seeking a new musical direction to support the style of its new vocalist Euro, and expressing unhappiness with the sound Brown produced for Captured in Time and Space, Euro band and producer parted ways. To replace Brown, Star Song tapped the Elefanti brothers Euro John, former keyboardist and lead vocalist for Kansas, and Dino, who had written songs for Kansas and had more recently produced albums for Christian metal bands such as Barren Cross. The combination of Schlitt and the Elefanti brothers significantly altered Petra's sound and set the stage for the band's greatest success. Back to the Street, after a brief introductory tour overseas with Schlitt singing the Volts classics, Petra entered the studio to record the singer's first album with the band. To a man, Petra's members said they found the Elephants easier to work with, and for the first time since More Power to Ya, the entire band performed on the same record without studio fill-ins. Likewise, the Elephants' hard rock roots led to re-emphasizing Hartman's guitars as the preeminent instrument in the band's sound. Looking to shatter the Petra formula, the band intentionally avoided what Hartman called a stock radio ballad. While acknowledging that the abrupt change in style likely cost the band some fans, Hartman hailed Back to the Street as the truest representation of this band's talent. The result was a transitional album that neither reflected where Petra had been, nor the band would be for the next decade. As a result, sales lagged, though the one ballad on the album, Thankful Heart, achieved radio success, ranking number 9 on the annual airplay chart. The album received positive reviews though not quite gushing, as evidenced by CCM magazine's half-hearted praise, with Back to the Street, Petra rocks, and they do it pretty well. Nevertheless, the album was Petra's third straight studio offering to be nominated for a Grammy, and for the first time, the Gospel Music Association recognized Petra's success with 3 Dove Award nominations, Artist of the Year, Band of the Year and Contemporary Album of the Year. This Means War. Finishing their Back to the Street tour in December 1986, Petra entered the studio the next month to begin writing and recording the band's follow-up. In the 3 weeks between, Hartman wrote 7 songs the foundation of what would become This Means War. An album that musically saw the band continue to transition away from the keyboard-influenced, highly polished rock sound it had perfected earlier in the decade and toward an arena rock sound heavy on guitars and emphasizing Schlitt's soaring vocals. Lyrically, This Means War took the implicit spiritual warfare theme that had been present in Petra's albums and tours since Never Say Die and emphasized it further. Although the album ended for good the band's long-standing tradition of featuring electric guitars as Warcraft, its picture of a warrior on his knees complemented songs with titles such as Get on Your Knees and Fight Like a Man, All the King's Horses, and the title track, a rousing rocker backed by a marching drum beat that addressed Satan as the preordained loser of the war he had declared against Christ and his followers. The message seemed in part a response to the attacks lobbed against the band by preachers and televangelists, especially Jimmy Swaggart, who denounced rock music in general and Petra in particular as tools of the devil. It wasn't the first time Petra musically had addressed its Christian critics, doing so most explicitly in Witch Hunt on Beat the System, but the attacks clearly affected the band. Not only does it deny the kids the opportunity and encouragement to go to the concert, but it hurts terribly our ministry, Hartman told CCM. We experience a lot more skepticism. He says that there's all this decadence in Christian music, and that we're all in it for the money. The result was the most conceptual album Petra's ever done, and another hit. Within 5 weeks of its release, the album hit number 1 on CCM magazine's sales chart, where it joined the title track and Don't Let Your Heart Be Hardened at the top of their respective charts. This Mean War's initial sales drew comparisons to Amy Grant's Age to Age as consumers snapped it off the shelves. It also garnered the band its fourth consecutive Grammy nomination. On Fire. As Petra's popularity built still further, the band cashed in by sponsoring children through Compassion International and advocating for a constitutional amendment allowing prayer in public schools. Applying the spiritual warfare theme explored in This Means War. Petra formed prayer warrior groups across the country, bands of youth groups to pray for each other. The focus on shepherding Christian youth through a spiritual battle zone continued on the band's next album, On Fire. With a cover featuring a flaming sword breaking through a pane of glass, On Fire was Petra's heaviest album yet, the culmination of the transition begun with Back to the Street. A fully hard rock album, bordering in places on heavy metal, On Fire made the most of songs such as All Fired Up, Hit You Where You Live, and Minefield, all of which continued the spiritual warfare theme. CCM magazine, in praising the album, called On Fire the crunchiest Petra sound yet, and praised the first two tracks as the most exciting 8 minutes of rock Petra has ever put to tape. Once again, the band scored hits with its initial singles, as First Love, the radio ballad, and Minefield, the rocker, hit #1 on 3 of Music Line magazine's 4 Christian radio charts. First Love finished 1988 as the year's 10th most played radio single. With the album, Petra released a long-form film, tying a series of short-form music videos together with ministry segments. The film garnered the band its first Dove Award, for long-form music video of the year in 1990, and its 5th consecutive Grammy nomination for its studio offerings. The tour, meanwhile, reflected the band's increasing name recognition, with more than 100 shows and a stage set that included a 30-foot steel and aluminum sword modeled after the On Fire album cover. Touring with popular evangelist Josh McDowell, Petra played to audiences of more than 8,000 each night. On Fire featured the first lineup change since Schlitt joined the band, as bassist Mark Kelly was replaced by Ronnie Katz, ushering in the most stable lineup in Petra's history: Hartman on guitars, Schlitt on vocals, Laurie on keyboards, Weaver on drums and Katz on bass. Petra prays, The Rock Cries Out. Touring with the popular McDowell brought Petra credibility with youth leaders and church pastors, who were impressed by the speaker's forceful defense of Christian rock music. Seeking to build on that growing influence, Hartman and Schlitt turned to youth ministers directly at a conference in California, asking them how Petra could better aid their ministries. The response: produce some music that could be better replicated in a church setting. So we thought, what if we do a CD with worship songs that we think are cool, but do it Petra style and then provide an accompaniment track for the youth groups? Schlitt said. The result was the first ever contemporary praise and worship album in Christian music, with praise staples such as Take Me In, The Battle Belongs to the Lord, and King of Kings done in Petra's hard rock style, together with 2 new rockers in the same lyrical vein. The band's new label, Word Records, billed it a praise and worship record unlike any ever seen. Inside Music magazine agreed, calling Petra praise truly different. In one interview, Schlitt acknowledged the band was going out on a limb. The limb held, as Petra prays, The Rock Cries Out became one of the band's best-selling, certified gold by the Recording Industry Association of America in 1998. After its release in October 1989, Petra Praise remained in the top 10 of Christian contemporary album sales for nearly a year. The artwork also won a Dove Award, the band's second. In subsequent years, the album would be cited by such popular praise bands as Sonic Flood as influencing their decision to enter the genre. Beyond belief. The success of Petra Praise opened the door for even greater success than Petra had seen previously. The Christian rock scene had exploded, and the critics of the past decade had largely been silenced. The band went back to the studio to record a hard-hitting album that would be accompanied by a concept movie, in which the characters interact with the band between 6 music videos. Lyrically, the album focused on the concept of faith implied by the album's title, Beyond Belief, with radio singles entitled Creed, Love, and Prayer, as well as the title track and I'm on the Rock. Musically, the band embraced a hard rock sound reminiscent of Def Leppard, as described by CCM magazine. Petra has certainly moved more and more toward a big, arena rock sound in the past few years, and Beyond Belief is, if not completely Kansas-inspired, certainly on par with some of the best arena rock music around. Beyond Belief was huge, the band's most successful release ever, peaking at number 1 on the Christian charts and certified gold by the RIAA in 1995. The radio single Love shot to the top of the charts and stayed there, becoming Christian radio's biggest hit of 1991. It won the band its first Grammy, in the newly created Best Rock Contemporary Gospel Album category, as well as Dove Awards for Rock Album of the Year, Rock Recorded Song of the Year for the title track and Recorded Music Packaging of the Year. More historically, the Gospel Music Association for the first time honored a rock band as Group of the Year, as Petra beat contemporary artists 4HIM, First Call, Take 6 and BB&CECE Winans. The band was at the peak of its popularity, playing to sold-out arenas of 10,000 fans on yet another nationwide tour, and in CCM magazine's year-end Reader's Choice Awards, the band swept to first place in 8 categories, second place in 4 more, and garnered 3 times as many votes for Pop Rock Artist of the Year as second-place finisher Michael W. Smith. Unseen Power, at the height of its career, the members of Petra were wary of repeating the arena rock formula that had served the band so well since the mid-1980s. Seeking a way to change directions musically, the band and its producers for their next album hired an outside engineer for the first time, bringing in Neil Kernan, who had previously worked with Kansas, Elton John and Peter Gabriel. Along with its usual hard rock fare, the band added tracks that featured a gospel choir and a bluesy sound, and Kernan's influence led to an album with a stronger emphasis on the band's rhythm section. Hartman also shifted his songwriting style, moving away from his practice of constructing albums around loose themes and writing tracks more personal in nature. The result was Unseen Power, a Petra album that, for the first time, was distributed by a secular record company, Epic. That, and the immensely favorable reaction to its release, led to talk of Petra following in the wake of Grant and Smith as a potential crossover hit, popular in both Christian and secular circles. "If it happens, then yes, we're ready," Schlitz said of the possibility. Though the secular breakthrough never came, the album was a hit, allowing Petra to top 6 million records sold since its inception, the most of any Christian artist at the time. The newly formed Hard Rock Cafe asked the band for materials to include in its restaurant displays, another first for a Christian band. And Petra became the only Christian band to play Farm Aid when it took the Texas Stadium stage before 40,000 people in 1992. Unseen Power opened number 1 on Billboard's Christian music charts in November 1991 and stayed in the top 10 for 7 months. Radio single Hand on My Heart was among the top 20 songs on Christian AC radio in 1992, and it was one of 5 tracks from the album to hit number 1 on the Christian radio charts. Unseen Power garnered the band its second Grammy, again winning for Best Rock Contemporary Gospel Album, and a Dove Award, for Rock Recorded Song of the Year. Wake Up Call, taking what for its members was an unusual year-long break between touring and recording the band's follow-up to Unseen Power, Petra emerged to a changing musical landscape requiring adjustment from the 20-year-old band. "I think we're on the verge of a new era for Petra," Hartman said shortly after the release of 1993's Wake Up Call. "I'm not sure what that will be but it won't be disco." As the broader musical climate soured on the arena rock style that had been Petra's musical core, the band continued to revamp its style, breaking with the Elefanti brothers for the first time in 6 records. Instead, Brown Bannister, who at the time had won 8 Grammy Awards as a producer and songwriter, mostly for Amy Grant, was brought in. The reason for the change was purely practical. The band, now consisting largely of middle-aged fathers living in Nashville, did not want to travel to California, where the Elephants were based, to record an album. Also seeking a new musical direction, the band sought out Bannister after enjoying his work for White Heart earlier in the decade. Wake Up Call as a result was the band's first significant shift from the style of the 1980s, featuring fewer driving rock tracks and favoring instead mid-tempo songs and ballads. Bannister's production style, favoring authenticity over the Elephant's slick production styles, led to a raw feel for the album. Hartman called it probably the most indicative of who Petra really is. The change was well received, as the album stayed on Billboard's Christian Albums chart for more than 5 months and was the third consecutive Petra album to receive a Grammy for Best Rock Gospel Album. The short-lived America's Christian Music Awards named Petra Favorite Rock Group or Duo and named Wake Up Call Favorite Rock CD, and the band won a Dove Award for Rock Album of the Year. In the 1994 CCM Readers Awards, the band continued to clean up, winning Favorite Rock Artist Band, Favorite Rock Album for Wake Up Call and Favorite Song for the radio hit Just Reach Out. More change was in the offing, however. As the band concluded its world tour for Wake Up Call in 1994 and began looking to re-enter the studio, Hartman, the lone remaining founding member, decided to retire from touring. An era had ended. 1995 Euro 2002, the post-Hartman era equals, once again, rumors swirled about the band's imminent demise. Laurie, who had been Petra's keyboardist for more than a decade, left the band, and Hartman, citing a desire to be closer to his family and focus on songwriting, retired from touring. Meanwhile, Schlitt had just released a solo album. The band rejected the rumors, however. Hartman said he would continue writing and doing studio work with the band, and he turned over nearly all of Petra's administrative duties to Schlitt. Schlitt brought in Jim Cooper to replace Laurie and David Likens to replace Hartman on tour. Weaver was now the only band member with a connection to the Vaults era of Petra Euro, and he was hired when Petra was 10 years old. It was the first wholesale lineup change since 1980, but it was far from the last. No Doubt, the new lineup set to recording No Doubt, a concerted effort to reach a younger audience no longer interested in the driving hard rock that had made the band the biggest in Christian music. Back to using producers John and Dino Elefanti, Schlitt called the album the best record we've ever done. The critics disagreed, citing in particular the electronic, scaled-back nature of the drums, which sapped the life out of the disc's rockers, and the prevalence of fair-to-middle in tracks that failed to break any new ground. The album opened at number 2 on Billboard's Top Christian Albums chart but fell out of the top 10 2 months later. It peaked at number 91 on the Billboard Top 200, lasting 8 weeks, and Schlitt acknowledged sales had dropped from the band's previous chart toppers. Its key radio single, the title track, barely cracked the 40 most played songs for 1995. For the first time since the creation of the Rock Gospel Album category in the Grammys, Petra was nominated but failed to win, though it did pick up a Dove Award for Rock Album of the Year, and CCM magazine's annual Reader Awards placed Petra once again at the top as the fans' favorite rock band, with No Doubt their favorite rock album. The lackluster sales and tepid reviews, combined with the lineup changes, painted a picture of a band in decline. The quick departure of Cooper and Likens, joined by longtime bassist Katz, did not help. Schlitt said Katz cited fatigue with a touring lifestyle, but that he fired Likens and Cooper over differences about the band's musical direction and unhappiness with the possibility of recording a second Praise album. Lonnie Shapian replaced Katz on bass, while 2 members of Schlitt's solo band, Kevin Brando and Pete Orta, filled the remaining slots. Petra Praise 2, We Need Jesus. Despite the turmoil, Petra prepared in 1997 to release its 16th studio album, a sequel to its wildly successful Petra Praise album 8 years earlier. The band had noticeably slipped from the heights it had occupied early in the decade. Things kind of tapered off for a while, Hartman said of the post-Wake Up Call Petra. I think there's a really good chance Petra could be back on the upswing. Petra Praise 2, We Need Jesus featured few truly hard rock songs, as evidenced when it was nominated for a Grammy in the Best Pop Contemporary Gospel Album category. Instead, it placed heavy emphasis on acoustic guitars, mandolins, keyboards and other, more experimental styles. The title track, The album's big radio single featured guest vocals from foreigners Lou Gramm, and though Petra Praise 2 reached number 1 on the Christian Albums chart, overall sales flagged, as the album barely reached the Billboard 200, peaking at number 155. One secular critic dismissed the disc as religious music, and labeled Petra the Barry Manilow of Christian rock. We Need Jesus eventually won a Dove Award for Praise and Worship Album. The failure of the album to rejuvenate the band's career seemed apparent by September 1997, when Schlitt was asked about the band's success. "I would say from my gut that we are probably as low as we're going to go in that valley, and heading for the next peak. That's fine with me because everybody needs a turn. We've been at the top of the mountain twice already, and, if nothing else, we need to get out of the way and let other bands have some fun. I mean, now there's variety that Christian kids can have. And they don't just grab Petra. Now they can grab jars of clay, DC Talk or Newsboys." God Fixation, with Orta, Chapin and Brando established in the band, they joined with Schlitt and Weaver to produce the Incarnations' first full-fledged Petra album, God Fixation. The three new members were given broad rein to influence the music as they wrote songs with Hartman, leading to a drastic change toward a mellower rock sound. Though the album was praised by critics as fresher and more immediate than Petra has been in a long time, hailed for strong music and songwriting and nominated for a Grammy, fans clearly rejected the album's alt-rock, mid-tempo feel. The album failed to reach any higher than 10th on the Billboard Christian Albums chart and missed the Billboard 200 altogether. Faced with criticism that the band had strayed too far from its hard rock roots and did not sound like Petra anymore, Schlitt responded, "Petra wasn't selling worth a stink. Petra was going down the drain, and I don't want to go down the drain yet." Double Take, the band's contract with Word Records was stumbling to an end. To complete the 6-disc deal, the band re-recorded a set of its biggest hits in an acoustic format, including 2 new songs. The album, called Double Take, was all but ignored by both Word and the Christian music industry and met with antipathy by the band's fans, who rejected the reimagining of some of Petra's most loved songs. Though it garnered some positive reviews, HM magazine for one said these stripped-down rockers sound pretty good. The album was largely rejected by critics and fans alike, and it sold fewer than 40,000 copies. When Double Take won Petra its 4th Grammy, for Best Rock Gospel Album in 2001, critics charged it was an example of the Grammy voters being out to lunch. After 6 albums that spanned Petra's highest peak and ended with the band in its lowest valley to date, the band and its label parted ways. Their interests were starting to go in other directions, so it was time for us to leave and find a label that's interested in rebuilding the fact that we still exist, Schlitt said. With the band's future again uncertain, Petra received the highest of accolades from the Gospel Music Association as the first rock band to be inducted into the Gospel Music Hall of Fame. Soon after, however, as Petra continued to search for a new label home, the band experienced another massive upheaval when newest member, Trent Thomason, left the band after only a short tenure due to lack of live dates. Soon after, Chapin and Orta left the band as well. Once again, only Schlitt and Weaver were left as the faces of Petra. Revival. After a lengthy label search, Petra was signed by Pop Records, then just 2 years old, and founded by Newsboys lead singer Peter Furler, an admirer of the band. Pop assigned former Sonic Flood members Dwayne Laring and Jason Halbert to produce a third praise and worship album, to be called Revival, a none-too-subtle reference to the label's hopes for Petra's career. Additionally, the label focused its packaging solely on the band's 3 most famous members, convincing Hartman, who still wasn't touring but had never stopped writing and playing guitar in the studio, to join Schlitt and Weaver as the label-marketed version of Petra. Studio musicians, including bassist Rick Ray, filled in the rest. The result was a well-received album, helped in part by an pop gimmick that comprised sending radio executives and media representatives an unlabeled CD of the album and asking them to guess many doing so futilely what band had recorded it. CCM magazine described the album as a cage match pitting Aerosmith against Third Day, and several reviewers praised the band's modern rock rendition of the classic hymn Amazing Grace. Nevertheless, the band struggled to gain airplay for its singles, and the album failed to crack even the Billboard Christian Albums chart. Petra hired 3 new members for the subsequent tour: Bryce Bell on keyboards, Quinton Gibson on guitars and Greg Bailey on bass. His inclusion on the album artwork notwithstanding, Hartman maintained his retirement from touring. 2003 2006, The End equals, as it entered the studio for its 20th album, Petra continued to find stability elusive, as Bell and Gibson left to pursue other endeavors. Then, in a shocking announcement, the band announced drummer Louis Weaver, the longest-tenured member of Petra other than Hartman himself, had come to an impasse with the rest of the band and will not be forming with us any longer. Weaver in his own statement said the band had fired him, and that he was shocked and surprised by the decision. Hartman later said the decision had been made by Schlitt, in consultation with his pastor and Hartman. Neither side gave a reason for the dismissal. Jekyll and Hyde. For the band's 20th studio album, Jekyll and Hyde Furlow handled production duties himself. With Weaver's departure, Furlow played drums, while Gibson's departure meant Hartman would be Petra's full-time guitarist for the first time since 1994. Wade Janes, a studio bassist, also was tabbed to perform in place of Bailey, at Furlow's request. Furlow in particular pushed Hartman to write heavier, riff-based songs along the lines of the title track, which Hartman had written before the decision to record Revival instead of a traditional album with original material. The result was an exceptionally heavy album filled with crunchy riffs, modernized by removing the trademark keyboards and guitar solos from Petra's sound. In an in-pop-produced statement, Schlitt called the album our most aggressive rock record so far. Critics and fans alike greeted the album with acclamation, hailing it as the band's best album in years, and one of this year's biggest musical surprises, a powerful rock effort. Bordering on metal. For the first time since Petra Praise 2, 6 years earlier, the band broke onto the Billboard charts, peaking at number 22 on the Christian Albums chart. The album also garnered Petra its 13th Grammy nomination. With no keyboardist necessary on tour, a first for the band since its earliest days, and Hartman returning to the stage, the band needed only to replace Weaver, hiring Paul Simmons shortly after the album's release. Petra then prepared a worldwide tour beginning in 2004, including a June show in Indiana that featured a reunion of original members Hartman, Huff and DeGroff in the middle of the contemporary band's set. Simmons filled in for original drummer Glover, who was invited but could not attend. Shows in India near the end of the year featured crowds as large as 20,000. Farewell. Despite rumors that Petra was working on another studio album, John Schlitt announced in May 2005 that he and Hartman had agreed to disband Petra at the end of the year, following a short farewell tour. As a final send-off, Petra recorded its show in Franklin, Tennessee, on October 4, which included special appearances by Volts and Laurie, each performing on a handful of songs from his tenure with the band. The performance was released on CD in November and DVD in March 2006, each titled simply Farewell. Petra's last performance began December 31, 2005, in Murphy, NC, and ended shortly after midnight, January 1, 2006, nearly 34 years after Hartman founded the band. 2007 present, reunions and 40th anniversary . Vertical Expressions, Schlitt and Hartman, after arranging worship music together for a youth retreat, reunited for an independently released praise and worship CD in 2007, calling themselves Two Guys from Petra and titling their CD Vertical Expressions. The songs featured contemporary praise songs in a raw-sounding, electric rock format, and included 2 bonus tracks from Petra's recorded farewell performance that had not been included on the farewell CD. Studio musicians played drums and bass, and former Petra keyboardist Jim Cooper teamed with Hartman on production. Hartman and Schlitt have since performed several shows together, playing acoustic renditions of Petra and Two Guys songs as recently as early 2010. Reunion shows. The full band is comprised on the farewell tour, first reunited at the end of 2007, playing a 90-minute set in Buenos Aires as part of Rock and Vida, a festival to commemorate World AIDS Day. The lineup consisted of Hartman, Schlitt, Simmons and Bailey. This version of Petra, though in some cases with Simmons replaced by Cristian Borneo on drums, reunited 4 more times in 2010, appearing at Heaven Fest in Longmont, Colorado, and Hills Alive Festival in Rapid City, South Dakota, as well as performing a pair of shows in Brazil. The band performed again at Rock and Vida in December 2010. Classic Petra and Back to the Rock. In early 2010, Hartman and former Petra members agreed to reunite to record an album in the fall, with a subsequent world tour. The lineup featured Hartman on guitars, Greg X. Volz on vocals, Mark Kelly on bass, Louis Weaver on drums and John Laurie on keyboards. Although that specific lineup recorded only one studio album together, Beat the System in 1985, Hartman, Volz, Kelly and Weaver were the heart of Petra's initial wave of success, recording More Power to Ya, Not of This World and Beat the System together before Volz's departure in 1986. Additionally, Weaver toured with the band in support of Never Say Die, Petra's first significant tour. Laurie, meanwhile, was Petra's longest-tenured keyboardist, joining the band on the Not of This World tour in 1984 and leaving 10 years later, at the end of Petra's second wave of success. Along with recording Beat the System, this iteration of Petra also was filmed for Captured in Time and Space, the first of the band's 2 live albums. The album, titled Back to the Rock, was released for digital download in November 2010, with hard copies also sold at the band's November concert taping. It featured re-recordings of 10 classic Petra songs from the early and mid-1980s, as well as 2 new tracks. Hard copies of the CD went on sale in January 2011. That same month, the members of Classic Petra played a live show together for the first time in decades, taping the concert at the TBN studios, with a documentary preceding the concert. Though recorded ostensibly for broadcast on TBN and eventual DVD release, the show first found life as a live album, released digitally to iTunes and Amazon in April 2011. A companion DVD was released that July. In July 2011, Classic Petra again performed at Cornerstone Festival, closing the day of classic Christian rock. 40th Anniversary Tour. In July 2013, Star Song released a 40th anniversary compilation album featuring more than 30 songs covering most of the band's trajectory. After that, the band reunited again with Schlitt, Hartman, Bailey, and Borneo, to tour in celebration of the band's 40th anniversary. The band performed in several venues during the fall of 2013. During that time, it was also announced that the band was invited to play at the Classic Rock Tour 2014 slated for February 2014. The show will also feature classic rock acts like Asia with John Payne, Phil Bates from ELO Part 2, and former Genesis frontman Ray Wilson. On March 5, 2014, Petra was recognized by SESAC with the Legacy Award. The award was presented during a ceremony held at Hillwood Country Club in Nashville, Tennessee, attended by band founder Bob Hartman, and members Schlitt, Bailey, Borneo, and keyboardist John Laurie. Petra also performed live at the event. Influence = Petra's influences = Larry Norman. Hartman, already a rock musician when he became a Christian, struggled at the time with whether Christians could glorify God through rock music. He credited the work of musician Larry Norman as inspiring him to continue in Christian rock. "I'll never forget the first time I heard him. The freedom Larry had on stage, that freedom to just be himself, really set me free in my songwriting. It really set me free in the establishment of Petra." Influence on others — during its 33-year career, Petra influenced countless artists in and out of the Christian scene. Petra was the only Christian band to play at the 1992 Farm Aid concert and the first Christian band to be included in the Hard Rock Café. In 2000, Petra was the first Christian rock band to be inducted to the Gospel Music Hall of Fame. The doubts about popular music mixing with Christian lyrics have mostly vanished due to their 25-year track record of proven ministry and changed lives. Petra was a true pioneer for our industry, GMA President Frank Breeden said at the time. In 2004, CCM readers inducted Petra into its Hall of Fame, with the magazine noting, "Few artists had as much influence in the formation and growth of what has come to be known as contemporary Christian music as did Petra." As one of the movemental Euro-unregistered trademark trailblazers, Petra bore the brunt of the controversy, enduring picketers, protesters and public denunciations by prominent Christian leaders. Still, all rabble-rousers aside, Petra managed to create some of Christian music Euro-unregistered trademark's most treasured recordings. The list of prominent Christian artists who began by listening to Petra is long, and it includes, Bart Millard, lead singer of Mercy Me, said More Power to Ya was the first album he had bought with his own money. "I bought it twice because I literally wore the first one out," he wrote in CCM. "Because of that record, I became consumed with Christian music." Singer-songwriter Chris Tomlin has listed Not of This World as his first Christian album. The lead singer of rock band Third Day, Mac Powell, said the band formed with the intention of being the next Petra. "You know, we wanted to be the next big brand that affected a lot of people through music." Former Newsboys lead singer Peter Furlow, who founded In Pop Records, used the label to give Petra a home at the end of its career and produced the band's final studio album and his band opened for Petra early in its career, and guitarist Jody Davis listed his first Petra concert as a major influence on his decision to move into live Christian music. Tributes. Many artists have recorded tributes to Petra, including Christian industry stars MXPX, Jars of Clay, Kevin Max of DC Talk, Sixpence None the Richer, Planky, Grammatrain and Galactic Cowboys, all of whom appeared on the tribute album Never Say Dinosaur, released in 1996 by Star Song. Country singer Tim McGraw has covered More Power to You in his concerts, including during his portion of a national telethon to raise money for victims of Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Other artists have included single-song covers of Petra in some of their albums. These include, Thankful Heart by Nathan Digicere, Judas Kiss by One Bad Pig, More Power to Ya by the Raptures, All Over Me by Die Happy, Adonai by Hocus Pick. Discography. See the main article for detailed information on all of Petra's albums and videos, including compilation albums, as well as a list of Petra songs available on other artists' albums and other compilation albums. Group history. After founder Bob Hartman, the band members with the longest tenures are drummer Louis Weaver and singer John Schlitt. Timeline. Awards. Inducted into the Christian Music Hall of Fame, inducted into the Gospel Music Hall of Fame, inducted into the Hard Rock Cafe. Grammy nominations. Best Performance by a Gospel Duo, Group, Choir or Chorus Not of This World, Best Performance by a Gospel Duo, Group, Choir or Chorus Beat the System, Best Performance by a Gospel Duo, Group, Choir or Chorus Back to the Street, Best Performance by a Gospel Duo, Group, Choir or Chorus This Means War. Best Performance by a Gospel Duo, Group, Choir or Chorus On Fire. Best Rock Gospel Album No Doubt, Best Pop Contemporary Gospel Album Petra Praise 2, We Need Jesus, Best Rock Gospel Album God Fixation, Best Rock Gospel Album Jekyll and Hyde. Grammy Awards. Best Rock Contemporary Gospel Album Beyond Belief, Best Rock Contemporary Gospel Album Unseen Power, Best Rock Gospel Album Wake Up Call, Best Rock Gospel Album Double Take. Dove Awards. Long-form music video On Fire. Recorded music packaging Petra Praise, The Rock Cries Out, Group of the Year, Rock Album Beyond Belief, Rock Recorded Song Beyond Belief, Recorded music packaging Beyond Belief, Rock Recorded Song Destiny, Rock Album Wake Up Call, Rock Album No Doubt, Praise and Worship Album Petra Praise 2, We Need Jesus. Other awards. The Netherlands Contemporary Christian Album of the Year This Means War. Notes. External links, Petra official website, Classic Petra official tour site.